Rotarians, thank you all for being here. I love seeing this full room, lots of faces, new and familiar, so great. Thank you for being here today on September 25th, 2025. We are going to take a moment of silence to reflect for prayer. Okay, our flag salute today is with Ron Burton, and the four-way test is Rob Andrew.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Would everybody please join me in the four-way test? Is it the
Truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
All right. In the interest of time, we have a very important guest today. We want to give her the floor as much as we can. I'm going to just read our guests, and we're really glad you're all here. If I do not say someone's name, please raise your hand and let me know that I missed them. Kevin Foster, thank you for being here. Marcus Smallwood, okay, thank you. Martin Holleran is the guest of Kathy Holleran. I saw you guys come in. Okay, Tony Frew is the guest of Barbara McKendry. Paxton Haas is the guest of Andy Rieger. And Stephanie Eugene, am I saying that right? Yes, okay. Is a guest of Lisa Johansson, Chad Vincent. And Millie Eubanks and Julia Brown are my guests. Thank you for being here. Megan Hankins is with Congressman Cole. And Kay Knott is with Alice McGrew. And Wade Smith is with David Hopper. So thank you all for being here today. Did I leave anyone out? What an exciting guest list. Thank you all for being here. Come back anytime. Just a couple of announcements. I'm going to start with the sad one. Many of you know that Chuck Thompson is a member of our club. His wife Gina unexpectedly passed away in earlier September. Her services were yesterday. So if you see Chuck, think of Chuck, you might just, extend your condolences. It was a shock to everyone. So, good news. Rotary t-shirts, this is your last day to order. The sign-up sheet is out there. Stephen also sent a link in email, so please, if you want one and haven't signed up, please do that today because the order goes in tomorrow. We have an event on October 18th and we want to have our shirts back for that. You will be billed through our dues payments with Steve Wood. If you want to make alternate arrangements, just get with Steve. Okay. Tonight's after-hours event is at Local from 5 to 7. Please join us if you would like. You do not have to be a member of Rotary to join us at after-hours. Please feel free to come. So, okay. A couple of things. Just want to say this. We have a great opportunity today to listen to our honorary member of Norman Rotary for over 20 years, Representative Tom Cole. And I chose the word listen very purposefully. Because in this room, with our fellow Rotarians, it doesn't matter which side of the proverbial political fence you sit on. Rotary stands for peace, and as such, we are a non-political organization. As Rotarians, we seek to find understanding, and by working to find common ground, we accomplish a great deal together. We can't do that if we're divided. Rotary International has a long history of bringing people together. We are, after all, the largest service organization in the world. And our theme for this year, Unite for Good, hangs on this banner in front of us as a reminder to seek understanding as a way to come together. So there will be time for questions, and as you ask them, please honor our long-standing tradition of nonpartisanship. And it is now my pleasure to introduce Representative Tom Cole. He served as the representative in Oklahoma's 4th Congressional District since 2003, and is currently serving in his 11th term. He is chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, making the first Native American and first Oklahoman to hold the gavel. Cole is an enrolled member of the Chickasaw Nation and the longest-serving Native American in the history of the United States House of Representatives. and is considered the foremost expert in the House on Native American issues. It is my pleasure to welcome Congressman Cole.
After a welcome like that, I wish we could take it down and here with all well starting next week, but afraid not. Number one, thank you very much for having me. It's always a great pleasure to come here for a couple reasons. The crowd's always good, the conversation's always good, and the food is always first rate. So thanks to all those that prepared it wherever they're at. I guess they're up at Inner Urban, but good stuff. Congress has been really unusual this year, and I would tell you probably opening several months of the Trump administration have been, whether you're for it or against it, the most active and consequential legislature that we've seen in a long time. Partly because he had a major decision to make when he first arrived. There was a big debate going between the House and the Senate institutionally. Normally, the Senate would like to proceed with a lot of different bills, but they also have a very unusual procedure they call reconciliation, which allows you once every fiscal year between September 30th of one year and September 30th the next year to pass bill legislation without, under their own rules, without the filibuster. In other words, you don't have to get to 60, you just have to get to 51. And the Senate certainly wanted to do a reconciliation. Those are not unusual at all. President Biden opened it with a reconciliation bill, the American Rescue Plan, did another one the next year with the Inflation Reduction Act. So it's a normal tool, but in this case, and again, those were big bills. The American Rescue Plan was $1.9 trillion spending bill. The Inflation Reduction Act was over $700 billion bill. So you expect it to be big, and it's usually one side or the other has control of both chambers, and they're trying to push something through that they think they won't get much support for on the other side. The House view was we should load everything up into the quote one big beautiful bill as it became to be called. And it really was an extraordinary piece of legislation because it covered so many different things. It made probably the biggest single part of it. It made all the 2017 tax cuts of the first Trump term permanent. That's prevented what would have been the largest tax increase in American history. Second, it fulfilled the president's promise in his second campaign to enact what I would call a sort of blue-collar, working-class tax agenda. No tax on tips, billionaires don't make tips. No tax on overtime, billionaires don't work overtime. And a $6,000 tax credit applied to Social Security on an income basis. Honestly, mostly aimed at helping people that's about all they have is Social Security and maybe a little bit more. Because the income gets up much above that, and the tax credit goes away on a graduated scale. So those are the two back tax components. And there was a major Medicaid reform proposal. And this is a big and controversial issue. None of that, by the way, takes effect until 2026. The changes were so sweeping, it felt it would take a couple of years. And they're mostly designed to try and remove some of the COVID-era incentives we had for Medicaid. They save over a decade about $1.4 trillion. And these are things in many cases that were meant to go away anyway. We'll get to another number about government funding. So those are the three big components, but there were other things as well. There's $170 billion for border security over a 4-year period. Congress can adjust that up or down. Actually, this has been one of the great successes of the Trump administration is at the border. This is the second month now we have not had a recorded illegal entry into the country. Pretty remarkable because we're getting thousands of them a day over several administrations. Second, it's a pretty dangerous world. War in Ukraine right now, worst combat since 1945 in Europe. 1.3 million casualties. I don't think most Americans really clearly grasp the scale of that conflict. We had 2,400 killed in action in Afghanistan in 20 years of combat. Each side, the Ukrainians and the Russians, lose more than that killed in action every week. So you're talking now about roughly 300,000 dead Russians and 1 million plus casualties, and probably 130,000, 40,000 dead Ukrainians and about 350,000 casualties. And that's amounting at about 5,000 to 7,000 a week right now. So it's a pretty intense conflict. And we obviously have a lot of saber rattling going on in the Western Pacific. China rapidly rearming, lots of threats aimed at Taiwan. It's clearly, strategically a very sensitive place. Taiwan is the largest chip maker, the most advanced chips in the world right now, computer chips. So the strategic value is really important to all concerned. And it's pretty vulnerable. It's 90 miles off the Chinese shore. It's 9,000 miles from the United States. So there's a $150 billion component over a 4-year period of additional capital investment in the American military. Everything from an effort to do something like the Israelis have with their so-called Iron Dome over a space much larger, the continental United States, obviously. A major shipbuilding program to deal with the Chinese, major effort in drone warfare. If you look at the war in Ukraine right now, 70% of the casualties on each side are drone inflicted. We've not seen anything like this before on the battlefield. And American soldiers, honestly, for the last 60, 70, 80 years, have never had to look up on the battlefield. We just had air mastery in every conflict we've been in. Much different today. These things are, we actually have a drone training school in this district at Fort Sill. I watched it explode from 700 students last year to over 1,000 this year to over 2,800 next year. It's pretty awesome. I've actually watched Ukrainian troops train in Europe on drones. When you're on a field and you look across at the battle line, and all of a sudden hundreds of drones pop up in the air, and they're targeted, and they're very advanced, and they're changing very rapidly. So that's something we need to get very much on top of, because our own men and women are going to face that kind of challenge. So anyway, those 5 components. Then there's a deregulatory component that should speed up the development of nuclear energy, traditional oil and gas industry, energy, pipelines, regulation, drilling, permitting, offshore, all this sort of stuff. And then there's a lot of things in there that people don't know anything about. The one that probably has the most interest in Oklahoma, we still have the safest airspace in the world. There's no question about it. But it's run on 1960s and 70s technology. It's mostly copper wires and floppy disks. And the estimates are it will take us $30, $35 million to upgrade our system to where it needs to be. The first $12.5 billion of that is actually in that legislation. And we'll benefit pretty substantially in Oklahoma, because we train almost all the air traffic controllers in the country just up the road at the FAA Center with Mike Maroney. So again, the sheer scope of this thing is enormous, and probably bigger than any single piece of legislation, bigger than Obamacare, bigger than the American Rescue Plan. It's just sweeping in the range of it. The other thing I'll tell you is getting it done was pretty amazing in and of itself. The Republican margin in the House of Representatives is only about 3 votes. And number one, getting 220 of anybody to agree on everything in a bill this complex is impossible. I mean, literally, you're going to like parts of it and not like other parts of it. But just think of your own personal life in terms of showing up, because if 3 Republicans are gone in any given day, the control of the House is flipped. It'll be next week, it'll be just 2. Our Democrats are filling up a vacant seat. So if somebody's sick, if there's a death in the family and they can't get to Washington D.C. or don't want to get, if there's a disaster in their district, matter of fact, if somebody dies, one of our members actually went back and looked at Congress over the last 80 years. And on average, about 4 members die out of the 435 in any 2-year period. And he literally got up at one of our conferences and trotted out these statistics and said, guys, it really depends on whether it's us or them the next few weeks. And everybody laughed about it, but it really got down to that in the end. To move the legislation, the House had to pass it twice. Basically, the first passes and then goes to the Senate, and the Senate changes it, you make a decision, then you can accept those changes or go to conference. The margin was so narrow, people felt like, look, if we try to do anything different, it's going to take forever. We're trying to move this quickly. So we accepted, so we had to move it again in a matter of weeks. The initial bill passed 216 to 214. And the Democrats had lost 2 members, good members, that had died literally in the preceding 6 months, and those seats were open. Had those members been there, it would have been a 216 vote, the legislation would have failed. Every single day in the House is like that right now. Now, there are some things, actually, you see the conflict, you don't see the times when the 2 sides work together pretty well on cryptocurrency, which was overwhelmingly bipartisan, negotiated out. I don't pretend to be an expert on that. I'm sure there's somebody who really knows more about it than me, but I'm told it's really significant and important legislation. And the people that I know that do know a lot about it, on both sides of the aisle, people that I respect a lot, frankly, the fact they were voting the same way was pretty reassuring. And then, so that sort of brings us up to now. Now, that's the extraordinary things that have happened. There's also just the normal stuff, which is the appropriations process itself, and I chair the Appropriations Committee. And it's a pretty complex process because we don't appropriate in one single bill. We appropriate in 12 different bills. All 12 of them have to move through the House. All 12 of them have to move through the Senate. They then have to be negotiated out because the versions are going to be different. There's supposed to be a top line, you quote, Mark II, developed by the Budget Committee in each chamber. Neither one of them got around to doing that this year. Or there's supposed to be an agreement between the President and the legislative leadership in both chambers, in both sides of the aisle, as to what a top line will be, and then we divide it up. But that agreement has not happened yet. In some ways, it would be premature. It tends to come a little bit later. Or there could be an agreement between the Speaker and the Pro Tem in the Senate, or the Majority Leader, excuse me. And that hasn't happened. So we've had to sort of move through. Now, we've moved all 12 bills through the House Appropriations Committee. And the Senate, which is much slower, and frankly moves in a much different process. The House is a majoritarian institution. So the first version, doesn't matter if it's Democrats, doesn't matter if it's Republicans, it's to be a partisan bill passed on a partisan line. You just got to get to 50 plus 1. United States Senate, you got to get to 60. So they actually start out in a bipartisan way. They negotiate their initial bills. And I have to say they've actually done a better job this year. Last year, the Senate did not pass a single appropriations bill across the floor. Not one. We were just going to have a giant, confab. This year, they passed 6 out of committee and 3 across the floor. And we're actually in pretty serious negotiations for 3. But we're behind schedule. And we're behind schedule largely because all the legislative energy was directed to this big reconciliation package, the cryptocurrency, and the what have you. So, there's also always, we're working on a farm bill. There's other things going on. But so the House made the decision. We want to keep the government open. So let's have what's called a CR, continuing resolution. And it's to be a clean CR. That is no partisan tricks, no effort to get anything new. It's just whatever's in place now continues for a number of weeks. We had Democratic requests. They asked us, we don't want to go all the way to January, which is where the administration went. I actually agree with them. You're better off to move in short bursts. I will guarantee you, long years in Congress have taught me, Congress deadlines are like alarm clocks. And the further out the deadline is, the less that's going to happen until you get there. So keeping a pretty tight leash on this thing
and moving along. And we've got 3 bills where honestly, we could be done in 24 hours. There's just no difference between the, we've already negotiated out the big differences. They're on military construction, veterans affairs, which is a big bill, lead branch, which is a controversial bill, but not big, it's how Congress runs itself, and then agriculture, which always has some debate around it, but we actually, the 2 sides were much closer than they usually are. They're only about $2 billion apart this year. So we get those 3 done quickly, then we put together another package, 3 bills, keep moving. The Democrats decided last week, I think under a lot of political pressure, that we want to add other things unrelated to the day-to-day spend. We want you to repeal all the Medicaid things that you have in the big, beautiful bill, even though none of them have been enacted yet or actually been put into operation. And then there's something called enhanced and premium tax credits for Obamacare that were a COVID era deal. When the government's shutting down businesses as it was, lots of people are losing their health care. So the sense was we need to expand Medicaid during that period, only for a certain period of time. It's only supposed to last from 2020 to 22. It was extended for another 2 years. But it's supposed to run out December 31st of this year. And there actually will probably be a pretty, sorry. Did it go up? There it is, sorry. But it actually doesn't even run out during the period that we've extended time to negotiate. And there probably ought to be a negotiation on that. For some people, it's really pretty central to keeping the price of health care stable. But it also sometimes people that make up to $600,000 a year. We don't really need to be doing that. So you want to sit down and have a change. Instead, basically, what Democrats have asked for is include these 2 things and throw in 1 or 2 other items as well, but those are the 2 big ones in terms of cost. In a decade, it would cost about $1 trillion to extend government funding for 4 weeks until October 31st. That is not likely to happen. So the House has all. Is it Karen? I must be, yeah, it must be where I hold it. Yeah, I think so. So anyway, that's where we're at right now. We passed a measure on Friday to keep the government open until November 21st, no changes, no differences. The Senate turned that down. Had the counter Democratic proposal was also put in front of the Senate. So it can't, it couldn't get 60 votes either. So there's 2 sides of the stalemate in the Senate. If you're in the House, you're just waiting for them to do something and send it back. Anything that comes back will be bipartisan. So then we'll have to react to whatever that is. And that's basically where we're at. If we don't get that resolved by September 30th, then funding stops for the government. And we go into shutdown mode. My personal view, there's no need for that. Some of this stuff, I get asking for more than you expect to get. There's a little bit of that that's going on the other side. I get where there could be a negotiation. But the best thing is just to keep the government running, have the negotiation, and not inconvenience the American people. You shut down the government, a couple million people don't get paid. That includes your soldiers, your border patrol, your workers out at Tinker Air Force Base, you name it. People can't get a passport, they can't get a visa, you need a government permit for anything, that's not happening. It's just, and it always costs you more to reopen the government than it does to just keep it running and work through your problem. And it never succeeds. I mean, I've seen each side use this technique 3 times in my time in Congress. I was against it all 3 times. First time was in 2013, which is actually the most like this. Republicans hated Obamacare, they had control of the House, and they said, we won't fund the government unless you repeal Obamacare. Well, Obamacare is still here, but we had to go through a 16-day shutdown before Republicans gave up. Then the Democrats did the same thing on DACA legislation, deferred action against children who came into the country. They weren't guilty of anything. They were traveling with their parents or traveling sometimes alone. But regardless, And that, in 2017, actually, Schumer shut down the government. Most people don't remember it because he shut it down on Friday and they reopened it on Monday. That's the difference between Republicans and Democrats. When Democrats are stupid, they get out of it pretty fast. But when Republicans are stupid, they are stubborn about being stupid. They hang right in there. And so the next one actually, and fortunately, most of the government, Americans forget, had been funded. It already passed the defense bill. The biggest spending bill domestically is something called Labor, Health and Human Services and Education. And it had already passed. So we passed actually 7 of the 12 bills. So it wasn't really a full shutdown, but it's still a pain. It went on 35 days until finally, and it was done to, quote, finish the wall. Well, the wall wasn't finished. So, I mean, it never, ever succeeds. The minute you shut down the government, the question ceases to be over what you shut it down. It's why are we going through this, and when are we going to get it reopened? So it's just one of these things that politically, I'm telling you, whoever uses it is going to regret it, and we don't have to do it. We've got a clean alternative, or, again, they can just say, okay, we can negotiate on these items, but it's not going to be part of the spending bills because it doesn't belong in the spending bills. Appropriations have no jurisdiction over Medicare, Medicaid, or Social Security. They all rest in either Ways and Means or Energy and Commerce. And I will tell you that's one of the big problems that we have, and I'll finish with this, and then take questions. You know, when our oldest serving member is a guy named Hal Rogers from Kentucky, he arrived in 1981 as former chairman of the Appropriations Committee, legendary appropriator. When he arrived, he called the Appropriations Committee. We appropriated 45% of all federal spending. The rest was Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, interest on the debt. And we appropriated 9.8% of the gross national product of the wealthiest country in the world, the United States. Today we appropriate 26% of the budget, and we appropriate 6.4% of the gross national product. The difference is the growth, almost unconstrained growth, and lack of funding for Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. A lot of this is driven just by what I would call pretty good news. The lifespan of the average American has increased exponentially in the last 20 or 30 years. Now, in the past, you know, when we first set up Social Security, let me just use that as an example. You got your first check at 65, and the average American lived to 63. Only the government would have a deal for you like that. But obviously, people lived past 63, but most of them were gone by their early to mid-70s. You really did sort of get your biblical 3-10. Today, if you get to 65, you have a 50% chance of getting to 85, and you have a 25% chance of getting to 93 or 94. Now that I'm 76, I think this is a very good thing. But you've got to change how you finance things. And then the most expensive part of life is the last 18 months of life. And that has really, you know, the number of people that were able to add that to them. And certainly not opposed to that. But again, it's expensive. You've got to begin to look seriously about Social Security and Medicare. We actually have done this once before. In 1983, Ronald Reagan was president, Tip O'Neill was the Democratic Speaker of the House, Howard Baker was the Republican. We were 3 months short of a 17% across the board cut in Social Security. Now, because they've run through the money. Money still comes in, you're still paying Social, but you just have to drop it under the law to whatever is coming in the door. They put together, and I was 34 years, I remember this at the time, and they looked at me and they said, you know, you're not going to retire at 65 with a full Social Security check. It's going to be 66 for you, and it's going to be 67 for that 1-year-old. But you're probably going to live a lot longer than your father or your grandfather did. And by the way, we're going to tax more of your income. We're going to raise the ceiling, and we're going to put an escalator on that. So as inflation pushes up, you know, that top line will go up as well. And that's going to extend it to about 2030 something. And guess what? It's going to 2033 before we're confronted with exactly the same dilemma. when Ronald Reagan did that, and everybody said, oh, this is the political third rail of politics. You can't touch it. It'll be the end of everybody's career. The next year, Ronald Reagan won 49 states, and Tip O'Neill stayed Speaker of the House, and Howard Baker retired to go run for president. So you can deal with these things. You just have to do it gradually, and it has to be in a bipartisan way. I actually have a bill that would do exactly what they did then, which said we're going to appoint a commission. Each of the top 4 members of Congress, 2 Democrat, 2 Republican, gets 3 appointments. The president will get 1. We had a little kicker to the bill. It was actually done with a guy named John Delaney, Democrat from Maryland, ran for president, sadly no longer in Congress, really good member. And we said, you gotta get to 9 votes, so neither side could jam the other. If one side got 7, one got 6, and you gotta get to 9, it's gotta be a Republican-Democrat solution of some sort. I still think that's the easiest way to deal with Social Security and with some of these others, but, so that's kind of where we're at. We're moving toward a government shutdown. It can be avoided. I hope we do avoid it. If we don't, I don't think it'll last very long. And with that, I'll shut up, but you're getting up, so I need to shut up anyway. I guess I want to. Yeah.
But I do want to allow time for.
Yeah, if you got any questions, fire away. And I will hang around a little bit afterwards if I don't get to your question. Yeah, Dave?
Is the political divide the reason we have to continually do these continuing resolutions, or is there anything structurally that?
There's
Never over and over and over again?
Well, the political divide is part of it, particularly when you have to get to 60 in the Senate. So that's part of it. But yeah, there's another thing that's happened. When I first arrived in Congress, we didn't do anything except appropriations from about late mid-May, to the August break. There wasn't much else on the floor. Now we're trying to cram too much in. And I tell you what, we have leadership on both sides, particularly on my side. We don't have any appropriators. They don't realize how much time. This is not one bill. This is 12 different bills that have to be produced in each chamber, pushed through the process and learned. It takes a lot of floor time to get 12 bills done. The one big beautiful bill covered a lot more subjects, but it was one bill. And so it didn't consume anywhere near the amount of floor time that a normal appropriations process would. So I think there would be a structural change, but the division is still, a huge part. Yes?
Yeah. First of all, thanks for coming in and speaking to us. It's been quite interesting to listen to you. I wanted to address a little bit of the elephant in the room lately about the political violence that's been in the country with the assassination of Charlie Kirk, the killings, assassinations of the Democratic lawmakers of Minnesota. And just what is your message to the public here in Oklahoma about that, and what can we do to kind of calm things down and move on?
Well, first of all, I don't know that I have any particularly profound advice on what you do. I will tell you one of the things that's being looked at, this is not a solution to the problem. That got dropped into the appropriations bills the last couple of weeks was enhanced security in the executive branch for the cabinet. The president obviously has the best security you can get him anyway. The enhanced security for the Supreme Court, which has also had lots of threats. We had somebody caught with a gun within a couple blocks of Kavanaugh's house, things like that. And then enhanced security for members of Congress. I think that's all fine. I personally think it's hard to secure 535 people who are out doing things like this all day long. They can't all have a security detail that's comparable to what the Speaker of the House and the Minority Leader have, or what have you. My advice is pretty simple. Number one, the members that attract the most threats are the members that are most provocative in terms of their language on either side. And I will tell you, I have a rule: the more I see you on television, the less effective. Unless you are like the Speaker or the Minority Leader. I mean, you hold one of those positions where. But if you're the average member, and I'm seeing you a lot on television, you're not getting much legislation passed. I mean, we have a lot of members that go to get clicks, more followers on the internet, that kind of stuff, and that doesn't help. And a lot of them get clicks by using inflammatory language. But we've got a deeper problem than that. There's just no excuse for either one. I mean, stop and think what happened in Minnesota. that you referred to, former Democratic Speaker of the House, has what she thinks is a police officer ring the doorbell. And she goes to the door, and she's killed, and her husband's killed. And then the guy went down to another pair, and they lived, but each of them got shot 6 or 7 times. How they lived, I'll never know. So, you know, it's everything to enhance mental health, but again, inflammatory political behavior is not helpful. You know, I'm pretty pleased in the Oklahoma delegation, we don't have any of that. You may agree or disagree, but it's not like James Langford is going to be out there provocative in terms of language. That's just not who he is, the Baptist minister, and he lives his faith. Mark Wayne could be a little provocative, but, you know, it's not, you know, it's just not anywhere near the level I'm talking about. So, anyway, I mean, you just gotta be careful. That's all I can tell you. Yes, sir. Andy?
Tom, I've done you and your mother and your family for almost 50 years, I think. And I know you're a student of history. British history is your doctorate. How will history view the period we're in today?
You know, it's not as unusual as you think. It's not good, but it's not the 1850s. You know, we're not killing 600,000 Americans because we disagree on that. It's not even the 1960s. But I'm old enough to have grown up when President Kennedy was assassinated, when his brother running for president was assassinated, when the greatest civil rights leader in American history, Martin Luther King, was assassinated. There were riots in the streets over civil rights in Vietnam. We're in a difficult time, but I don't think it's any more difficult than the 1960s. And I think we worked our way through that. And I think we'll work our way through this. I guess in the end, number one, I really do, we're a new country. We are an ancient democracy. Our institutions really do work well. And they've gotten better, not worse over time. I mean, when you're reading the Declaration of Independence, is all men are created equal. They did mean men. And they mostly meant white men. They certainly didn't mean red men or black men or yellow men. We don't see it that way anymore. The country has moved broadly, I would say, in the right direction. And the American people, at their core, are pretty decent people and pretty commonsensical people. And again, although we've got serious problems in this country with the immigration issue, is nobody wants to come and everybody wants to leave. There are not waves of people trying to, the only people who want to go to China are in North Korea. And nobody particularly wants to go to Russia. You know, they don't have a problem with people coming in. As a matter of fact, their population at the height of the Soviet Union collapse was 290 million people. You know how many Russians there are today? 140 million. That's how many people left when they got the chance and don't want to go back. If you think they don't want to go back, ask the Ukrainians. Because look at the price they're paying to make sure they're not subservient, let alone reabsorbed. So our country is still a pretty remarkable place, I think. And the institutions still work well. And we will work our way through this problem. I mean, American voters are a lot like OU football fans. At OU, they'll fire you for going 8-4, not 4-8. They intend to win. They intend to be successful. And they will send you off. If you think Oklahoma's very different, ask Mike Gundy, best football coach ever at one of our serious rivals, and the guy that won 170, he's gone. You know, he's gone after 2 bad seasons, or a season and a half of bad. He won 10 games, 2 years ago. So, you know, we have pretty high standards in this country, and I think it works pretty well. Yes, sir.
Kind of segueing into Eastern Europe and Asia, from an appropriations perspective and even a political perspective, like how do you balance the needs of Eastern Europe and kind of the NATO stuff going on there with the challenges that China faces in Asia? Can you
It's actually a good book called The Strategy of Denial by a guy that's the #3 guy at the State Department now, I'm trying to remember his name, which talks about the need for the Europeans to step up. And quite honestly, they've done a better job than they get credit for in this country. They've moved in the last few months from 2% of GDP to 5%. Now, 1.5% of that is infrastructure spending, so you can move weapon systems faster to the front. And, you know, in this country, too many of my friends on my side of the aisle act like we're the only people that help Ukraine. And over half the aid that Ukraine has gotten has come from other countries. There's a dozen countries that have spent a higher percentage of their GDP and their national budget to help Ukraine than we have. Now, they probably are because they're in the neighborhood. I mean, it's kind of Poland, the Baltic states, Romania, the front lines there. But the Europeans have stepped up here in a very big way. And heavens knows, look at the price of Ukraine. So, but I will tell you, I used to be a British historian. I have a doctorate from OU. And this is nearly like the 1930s. You know, great European power, changing borders, relitigating borders by force of arms. But it's not just this Ukrainian war. I mean, remember they took Crimea back in 2014 and nibbled away a little bit of Georgia. I mean, there's a lot of Russian movement in these. There's a reason why Sweden and Finland abandoned 80 years of neutrality and decided they're coming into NATO. And we're lucky to have them. They're excellent militaries and great countries. And then you've got, you know, just again like the 30s, you had a great Asian power, Japan then, China now, watching what was happening in Europe and planning what it would do based in part on that. And when it looked like the Italians and the Germans had been successful, guess what happens in the Far East? There's already war in China, but guess what happens to us in Pearl Harbor? If you think the Chinese aren't watching what happens in Ukraine, you should think again. And believe me, the Asians are very serious. That's why Japan spent over $20 billion helping Ukraine. It's not lethal aid, but it's aid that helps prop them up because they think they have a direct interest in the survival of Ukraine. I think they're right. You know, I do worry about, I do think we are in a very dangerous cycle here, and where our enemies have gathered in a cohesive fashion for the first time since the Cold War. In a way that's very dangerous. And back then we had Russia and China divided from one another from the 70s to the collapse of the Soviet Union. That's not the case today. It's Chinese money buying Russian oil that finances Russian military activity in Ukraine. So it is a dangerous, dangerous time. And that's one of the things. You know, we don't spend on defense what we used to spend. My dad was a career, non-commissioned officer. He retired in 1960. I'm not recommending him. He was spending 9% of GDP on defense. And the Reagan defense buildup was 6%. Today we're spending just over 3%. And I mean, one of the things legislatively we did do is put more money in defense in this most recent bill. But we're a long way from where we need to be secure, particularly as rapidly as China is arming and increasing its nuclear assets. Russians obviously have a tremendous nuclear force. The Russian army is not as good as we thought it was, not as good as they thought it was. But this thing is supposed to be over in 3 weeks. I will tell you this about our intelligence, plus and minus, and it's not a minus really. They knew. I mean, they were telling us 8 months before that this is coming. We can see where the Russians are moving their forces, and they are going to attack Ukraine, and we can see what they're doing. But they're like the rest of the world. They thought that would last about 3 or 4 weeks. We're in the 4th year, which says a lot about the Ukrainians. It says a lot about Zelensky. And honestly, it says a lot about the European and the American effort to provide the weapons that it needs to sustain that kind of resistance. I think we have an interest in that. We don't have an obligation there. We're not a treaty ally of the United States any more than Taiwan is. We do have an obligation to Taiwan under previous treaties to provide them with the means of self-defense, but we're not at risk. And it's actually one of the things that, what do you do if the Chinese, who now have a navy larger than the American navy, not as capable, but it's larger, what if they decide to just blockade Taiwan? That island has about 30 days of food, about 10 days of energy. So we wouldn't have a lot of time to decide what to do. So we would rather them not do that. But maybe preparing now is the message to send to them that don't make a gamble. Don't bet on this because it is very dangerous. And boy, that's a nice way to speak. Anything else? If any of you have, yes.
Hi, Tom.
Judy, how are you?
Okay, I want you to tell the president that I watch public television and I listen to NPR and I'm not radical left.
spoken like a proud former county, well, you were chairman at one point, weren't you?
Chairman of Clayton County Republic, 2.5 terms. But I have friends who are grown up in countries controlled by the Soviets. And they say the chaos we're seeing now is very familiar and they are worried. So I'm counting on you in the Congress to do your job.
Well, I'll give it my best shot, I'm 1 of 435. Yeah, you know, again, Woodrow Wilson used to have a wonderful saying, the great thing about democracy is sooner or later people get what they deserve. Nobody up there is appointed, certainly nobody in the House is, they're elected. So, you know, and I will tell you, I'm not going to name names, I've seen districts go from members, Democrat and Republican, go, that was a great member of Congress too. Like, how did that guy get elected by the same people that elected their predecessor? But, you know, again, that's the way our system works, and we'll see, we're evenly balanced now. I don't think that's likely to change. I mean, it's going to be pretty close election for the foreseeable future, just looking at the alignment of forces. So we need to learn to work together. Okay.
It's been interesting to hear all that you've had to say. So I want to thank all of our guests for being here. I would normally call you out by name, but I think we're past time. So thank you for being here today. Remember, we have after hours at local, and you don't have to be Rotarian to come. So come, bring a friend, and go out and make this a great week. Unite for good. Your turn.